At the end of October, I hosted the 5th and final MashUp Game Jam, challenging you all to make games around the theme transport. Quite a random theme, and definitely nothing to do with anything I may be working on. We had 171 people join the jam and ended with 32 games submitted, which isn't as much as we've had in the past, but there are some really good games people have made, and I had a lot of fun playing through them all. But before we get into my favourite games, here are a few honourable mentions. Transporter has you running around a factory and fighting off drones and other machines, and I really like the art style with the rusty colours and bold outlines. In Scoop Rush, you had to drive an ice cream truck, and I had a really good time trying to master the controls. Lockerban had a really unique connection mechanic that made for some interesting puzzles, and I enjoyed the character art. Chaos Drive had you driving upwards without hitting any bricks, and I really liked the mechanic of the visual brick detector appearing around you that added an extra layer to the gameplay. I really enjoyed the idea of Chariot Carnage, and the old school art style and controls gave it a charming feel. And now, on to my favourite games of the jam in no particular order. Let's talk about boats, specifically some boat game. You run a ferry service and it's your job to transport people from port to port. You start with one boat and 2 ports, and you basically just move between the 2 places. However, as you continue to do this, you earn money, and you can spend that money on upgrades to improve the quality of your service. It could be unlocking more ports, increasing the amount of passengers you can ferry, or even purchasing more boats. It's admittedly pretty simple gameplay, but there's a good sense of progression and feeling like your ferry service is growing and getting bigger. The art and colours also kind of remind me of those rugs you would have as a kid of cartoon towns, and this is like that, but on the water. Another way this game adds to the sense of progression, and probably the best part of the game in my opinion, is the storyline. Often throughout the game, you get these newspaper articles that cover the screen. Through this, you find that you've opened your own government-funded ferry service, and you're competing against a big privatised company that has monopolised the industry. These articles are full of satirical comedy that often hits quite close to home, and ends with the CEO of your competing company winning the election into power and privatising your ferry service. It's really entertaining and definitely adds to the game's experience. One game I had a lot of fun with was Golden Motion, a sort of base defense game where you deliver golden wagons to mines and defeat enemies that come to attack those mines. First off, it's about trains, so of course I'm going to like it, though I hate to break it to you, I think trains normally run on rails. Secondly, the game really builds off the idea of playing as a train in a very fun way. Throughout the game, you can collect wagons, and these wagons become your arsenal to launch at enemies to deal damage. You can control which wagon to launch with arrow keys, and if you launch a wagon, then all of the wagons behind it will disconnect. There are different types of wagons as well. If you collect a wagon full of coal, then your movement speed is increased. The gold wagons are what you deliver to the mines, but they can also deal more damage to enemies than an empty wagon can. And there's also a wagon full of what I presume to be dynamite, because when you launch that wagon it can kill a lot of enemies at once. It's a really fun, original idea that I think has a lot of potential, and the art style is really nice to boot. One of the more calming games out of this jam is Packet Panic. In this entry, you control the sending of packets over a network by connecting the senders and receivers via a router. Or in simpler terms, you draw a line from the triangles to the squares through the circles. It's a very abstract representation of how data is sent across networks, but it works well in a similar fashion to games like Mini Metro. If the game was just connecting networks by drawing lines though, it would be a bit shallow. So that's why the game also introduces hackers, a diamond shape that sends out viruses to destroy the packets when data is being sent. It's your job as the player to click on these viruses to destroy them before they reach any packets, and it's an enticing way to keep the player engaged through the secondary part of the gameplay. What I like about this game is, even though the word panic is in the name, the game presents itself as a calming experience, while also being an interesting education tool on computer networks. Whether it's through the soft colour palette, calm synth music, or the simple geometric art style, it evokes a soothing feel that I just really like. If you've ever thought to yourself, I wonder what it would be like to herd large rolls of cheese, I'd probably judge you and worry about what other kind of things you think about daily. But your thoughts wouldn't be too far from Cheese Wrangler, a platforming game where your goal is to guide all the cheese rolls into their pens. The first thing you would probably notice in the game is the artwork. The checkered green floor, pixelated textures, and blue sky gives me the same feeling of early Windows for some reason. To lure the cheese roll into the pen, you have to get close enough to the cheese to wake it up, at which point it will chase you wherever you go. Your job is to navigate the level to get to the cheese to roll into a pen, when it will then trap the cheese and your end goal will appear. It's a pretty straightforward goal, but there's quite a few levels here for the player to get through. Some levels test your platforming abilities, which can prove quite a challenge sometimes, as you have to balance moving forwards with turning around to check where the cheese is. The level also fails when the cheese falls off the level, meaning some sections with tight platforming can be quite the task to lead the cheese through. Now let's talk about 2D platformers, because a game jam wouldn't be a game jam without one. And the one I want to talk about is Delivery Berrie. You play as a berry who has to carry the food to their home in a short time limit, by running and jumping across a long level. You've got a lot of the typical things to expect in a platformer here. Jumping over gaps, coins to pick up, and enemies that die when you jump on their heads. And whilst this game doesn't necessarily change that formula very much, it also doesn't really need to. The controls are quick and precise, and the movement is accentuated with a lot of squash and stretch on the player to feel more dynamic. And having the game be one long level with the addition of the countdown timer means that it leaves the space for the player to understand the controls and slowly improve on their experience, so that by the time they manage to get to the end of the game, they've learnt the controls and how to utilise that fast-paced player controller to get through the obstacles very quickly. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. One of the games that does really well with its puzzle mechanics is Rooks, Bishops and Potatoes. There's a common type of puzzle sometimes referred to as the river crossing puzzle, where you have to move objects across a river, but you can only move one at a time, and certain pieces shouldn't be left with other pieces. For this game, it takes that idea and applies it to pieces in a chess game. Your goal is to move chess pieces from the left to the right using your wheelbarrow. What you want to avoid, however, is leaving black and white chess pieces to attack each other. And since we're using chess pieces, a piece can attack another piece of a different colour if it's within the movement pattern of their piece. Now I admit, I'm not very good at remembering chess or their rules, so I wasn't the best at figuring this out, but it's a very interesting game mechanic that is displayed quite well here. I often had to go about with moving pieces back and forth across the board to avoid any attacks, and even if the pieces did attack each other, at least it was flashy enough to not bother me so much. They also later on introduce a potato as a separate mechanic, where you can place a potato down to block the paths of other pieces. Though this is where I struggled, as I couldn't place the potato down where I wanted, I was still impressed enough with this game that I thought it deserves a good mention here. One of the games I had the most fun playing was Treat Tricky Delivery, an arcade game where you play as a rolling pumpkin who has to collect and deliver sweets around the map. When you deliver treats to destinations, you start a combo meter, and continuing to deliver sweets during that combo will increase it and give you more points when you deliver the sweets. There's a lot of good feeling in this one, with the movement being a bit out of control to feel like you actually are a rolling pumpkin. And with the rolling, it's a really nice touch to see the pumpkin face roll in the general direction of the movement. Certain big objects like the houses, trees and gravestones give a little wobble when you bounce into them, which is a great application of game feel. And it's also a fun challenge of control when you bounce off things so easily and have to fight for your momentum like a pinball. It's a game with an addictive gameplay loop and with enough effort put into certain areas of visual feedback, which makes it a good blend of chaotic controls and high score chasing goodness. One game from the jam I was pleasantly surprised with was Deep Deep Down, a platforming game where you use a drill to move around the level. How you use the drill is by aiming in a direction and clicking, which will shoot the drill off. That drill will then bounce back from stone walls, and when it resurfaces, you jump out of the ground. It's a mechanic that's very easy and intuitive to understand, and you can use it to get over walls, clear gaps and tunnel through blocks of dirt. The mechanic is also explored more with icy walls that reflect the drill and ground that pushes your trajectory. Though using the mechanic can be a little bit trial and error at times, it's really fun to use and there's enough exploration of the mechanic to not get boring. I'm also quite fond of the rainbow trail you leave when using the drill. It adds a bit of flair to the game, and when you get stuck in a loop it gets very colourful. For a game that takes your jump ability away, this one brings an amusing alternative that scratches my brain in the right way. The game that I think has one of the best atmosphere is An Urn for the Undying. You play as a fairy guide that has to collect souls and deliver them to this urn as you lead it on its descent down a well into the underworld. You control both the fairy and the urn, and throughout the descent there are enemies that try to steal the souls that you guide, and you can scare them off using the light the fairy emits. What's really powerful about this game firsthand has to be the mood. Most of the screen is black, which works well with the mechanic of light, but also helps sell the idea of descending into the underworld. When you go into a new screen, all you see is the bright foliage around the cave walls. And this is quite clever, for it gives the player an idea of the cave's layout, but still requires the player to move around to discover the way forward and any enemies in hiding. And I think I'm also just a fan of games that use strong outlines and basic colours. And it also has one of my favourite endings, as when you get to the underworld, you are met with this beautiful sequence. Great game overall. Finally, the game that came first in the jam was Choo Choo Train, a game about managing your spooky passengers on your spooky train. As the manager of this demonic train, your job is to move the passengers between carriages to satisfy their conditions, and sacrifice passengers to your demonic engine, which, might I add, is a very satisfying pun for the name. Every passenger in this game is a type of spooky creature, from skeletons to zombies to ghosts to clowns. Checking your logbook gives you information on each type of passenger, and every stop new passengers board the train, so it's your job to move the passengers between the train cars to get as many passengers as you can to, well, not die or kill each other. Another thing is that in order to move to the next station, you have to sacrifice a given amount of passengers to the choo-choo train as fuel, which plays back into your decisions on moving passengers around, as you then have to think about what passengers to keep and which to either sacrifice or leave to die on the journey. This entry has so much content to it that you would think it wasn't made in a week, and there's so much I like here, from the beautiful art style to the animations, from the game mechanic with a large amount of depth to the very humorous dialogue. This game is deserving of first place. Well done. And with that, the 5th and final MashUp Game Jam has come to an end. I've really enjoyed hosting these, and I've always loved every game that you have made, so thank you to everyone who took part in this jam and any of the previous jams over the years. Thank you for your time and effort, and I hope you all continue to make games, and most of all, enjoy making them. Have a lovely end of the year, and I'll see you all in 2026 with a new Railway Life video. Goodbye!